President Cyril Ramaphosa will lead the South African delegation to the 38th ordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the AU in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia on the 15th to the 16th of February this year. The Assembly aims to elect the new senior leadership of the AU Commission, including the Chairperson and Deputy Chairperson positions, and appoint 6 commissioners after the Executive Council endorsements. Candidate of South Africa for Commissioner for Education, Science, Technology and Innovation is Professor Mataboge, and candidate for African Union Commission for Infrastructure and Energy is Ms. Lerato Mataboge, and they join us now via our video link for more on this discussion. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us this evening here on SABC News. Professor, I'm going to start off with you this evening. Now, you've been shortlisted as a candidate for the AU, the position for Education, Science, Technology and Innovation. Maybe tell us more about this position.
Good evening, Bali, and to the viewers of the SABC. No, this is the position within the African Union which is expected to lead our continent on all aspects of education and all aspects of science and technology and innovation. By way of example, we might be aware that our continent has a macro strategy which we call Agenda 2063. We also have a strategy that we have developed to chart a way forward for the education system of our continent, and that is the continental strategy, continental education strategy for Africa. And we have a similar strategy for science, technology and innovation, which we call STISA. And the portfolio is to lead on those as well as all aspects of education in concert and in collaboration and coordination with all other commissioners.
And Lerato, I'm going to bring you in now on this conversation. You have been shortlisted for the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy. Maybe if you can just tell us, why do you think you are best suited to take up this role in the AU?
Thank you very much, Mbali, to you and your viewers. I believe that I'm a good candidate. In particular, South Africa is a good candidate for the role, because the election is taking place in the context where we've just concluded the first 10-year review of Agenda 2063. And we've realized that we are very far from reaching the Pan-African vision that we have set for ourselves of an integrated and prosperous continent where Africa is really a credible player in the global community. So we know that one of the key gaps is the infrastructure deficit that we have on the continent. We have a lot of acceleration and catching up to do. There's a great deal of mobilization of financing, including private sector participation in making sure that we catch up in the infrastructure gap. Industrial infrastructure, transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure being critical. So we believe that it's time, now that we are now in the acceleration phase, that we bring in the South African experience and the South African financial and EPC muscle, as it were, to the infrastructure portfolio to move the continent forward.
And Prof, when it comes to your selection to play a very critical role in education, science and technology, not only in South Africa but on the continent, what does this selection for your candidacy mean for South Africa and the continent as a whole when it comes to the role you can play?
Mbali, this is a privilege for those of us that have would be given this opportunity if it were to arise. Many of us have spent a better part of over 30 plus years in education, science and technology in our country and on the continent. And it is about how we harness the power of education to transform societies, to transform lives. Put simply, every child on our continent who should be in school, particularly in primary, should be in school, and it should be our responsibility as a society, as a continent, in its respective countries to make sure that that happens. Part of the mandate of the commissioner is to facilitate, to enable, to encourage, to support the attainment of that very simple vision. Likewise, on the science side, it is known across the world that science and technology are engines to drive social and economic development. And it is important that we find creative ways of how we harness science, technology, and innovation for the benefit of our continent, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in agriculture, whether it is in health, whether it's in water, or any facet of the lives of our people. Let us find ways and means of using science to change people's lives. And that is the mandate that we have. And it is part of what I have been doing for the better part of 30 years.
And Ms. Lerato, should you be selected into this role and be voted in come next week, what will be your number one priority should you take up this position as Commissioner?
My number one priority will be to address the issue of energy poverty that is on our continent. We have 600 million Africans that have zero access to electricity as we speak. We are talking about a continent that only has 25% of broadband access. We are talking about a continent that has fragmented infrastructure. We are unable to trade with one another. We've got 18% intra-Africa trade levels. So this means that the priority has to be how do we make sure that we crowd in the resources that we need to move our infrastructure forward? We've got the right plans. We've got the program for infrastructure development in Africa that we need to support. That program requires review. That program requires funding mobilization. So the priority will be to work with Outer NEPAD to review the program and make sure that we prioritize one, catalytic projects that have a cross-border impact and multiplier effect to really interconnect our continent. Our biggest challenge here is that we are not interconnected. Number two, we need to electrify the continent. And we need to look at solutions that are going to be responsive. We cannot be talking about singular large grids, for example. We need to be talking about off-grid solutions. So those would be the priorities that we're going to have to focus on as a continent, as the work that I'm keen to lead in that regard in the immediate period, because we have to electrify the African continent. We can't industrialize without energy. Green industrialization awaits us, and we need energy to do that.
Certainly. And Prof, I'm going to pose the same question to you. I mean, should you be voted into this position, what would be your first task to address some of the problems being faced in education on the continent?
Mbali, in presenting my vision for this portfolio, it's difficult to just simply focus on one priority. I presented 7 focal areas, and allow me to just talk to 2. And if time permits, we can come back to the others. 60% of our continent is composed of the youth. We are a young continent in terms of age of our population, and therefore it is imperative that we invest in that youth, because they are the ones that are going to transform our continent, not just tomorrow, but into the next century. And education must be geared to support that very youthful population. Secondly, 50% of our population is women and girls. And therefore, again, our policies, our strategies, everything that we do within the education system must recognize that and must advance gender equity. There is a third leg of that, because we often talk about social inclusion and we forget that part of the headache that we have had in our continent is sometimes the upheaval that we find that has led to the death of our soldiers in the DRC. That upheaval has led to young people, children in particular, either being orphaned, or sometimes having physical disability. Other disabilities come by virtue of health problems. Others are psychological. And therefore, our education system must be inclusive to be able to deal with those that are perceived to be at the margins of our society, those that are living with disabilities. So the issue of equity, gender equity in particular, the need for us to invest in our youth, the need for us to be inclusive in the way in which we address the education challenges of our continent is one of the priorities. The second one that I just want to mention is what I call inculcate. The English would probably use the word imbue, which is to ensure that the choices that we make, the decisions that we make, the strategies that we develop, the policies that we develop are informed by empirical evidence of science and technology. Science is a very powerful tool to be able to transform economies. And so we would want to present a scenario whereby those choices are scientific in the way in which we make them. And that is just two of those focal areas that I would be bringing to the Commission should one be successful.
All right, Prof. Thank you so much. Let's close off with you, Ms. Lerato. And I mean, your portfolio also very important in terms of electrifying many African communities. And they're giving us those staggering statistics coming out from those who still don't have electricity. What would you say when it comes to the support which is needed to fulfill this role, to see some of these issues you've pointed out being realized across the African continent?
One of the most important roles of the African Union is that it sets norms and standards and laws, as it were, for the continent, to move the continent forward. So I think what it's going to take for all of us, should we have the privilege of being elected commissioners, is to really bring back the strategic role of the AU to make strategic decisions that are going to change the lives of the citizens of the continent. So it's about how do we make sure that the institution helps and collaborates, and we use the muscle of the African Union to work with the regional economic communities, for example, and go all the way to the member states level, so that we have a holistic approach to development on the continent, and we domesticate the decisions and the strategies that we have at the African Union level, and have them find expression at national level. The citizens of Africa need to understand what the African Union is for, that it stands for the citizen, it stands for development. So there'll be a lot of work to be done, not only to implement development, but to really bring the AU closer to the affected stakeholder, and that is our citizens in our respective, the different countries on the continent.
All right, Ms. Lerato, thank you so much for your time. And Professor Mulapo as well, thank you so much, and all the best for your candidacy next week when that voting indeed does take place. That is the candidates there for the South Africa for Education, Science, Technology and Innovation. That is Professor Mulapo Thobela, as well as Lerato Mataboge. She's the candidate for the African Union Commission for Infrastructure and Energy. Of course, voting there will be taking place next week, Wednesday.